Hi, everyone. Today, I want to share with you a few of the things that I'm doing to sustain my engagement right now, my activism, while also taking care of myself in the process and doing the best I can to prevent burnout. What I will just say before I dive into that is that you know that this is a little bit of a different format than usual. It's been a long time since I've made any kind of video. I struggle with organizing my thoughts and expressing myself through language, both in when I'm speaking and through writing. And so while I did actually write this blog, this is a written piece. I wanted to experiment today with delivering it through a video and just allowing this to be an experiment, allowing this to be imperfect. I think is really important for me to practice and for all of us to practice as we go forward and engage in social justice work in whatever way that we're doing. That's got to be really a guiding piece is imperfection and experimenting and just kind of doing the next thing that's in front of us to do. So with that, I created this article. I'm like created, it sounds like it's such a big thing. But I recognize that a lot of people are struggling right now. I know that being someone who feels a lot, being a sensitive person, it's a difficult time, right? We are exposed to just one atrocity after another at a scale that while fascism even in the United States is not new and is not unprecedented in this country, the scale that we're being exposed to these things is right, and maybe the scale in terms of just intensity is also a lot. Right. And I'm also hearing from a lot of folks who feel frustrated, sometimes lonely when they encounter people, maybe even loved ones, who seem able to just kind of shrug things off and continue moving about their lives um, without really being affected in quite the same way or without acting, right, in response to the injustice that we're seeing. And while we certainly do need to, live our lives and have, comprehensive parts of how we operate and what we do, there is a difference, right? That I think we know. And, for me personally, I cannot look away from injustice. It's just not how I'm wired. It's not how I'm built. Some of my core values are justice and human dignity and moral courage and stewardship and caring for all beings and the planet. And so one of the things that I think we miss sometimes when it comes to burnout is that burnout isn't only overworking or being asked to do too much without resources or without rest. Burnout can also come from when we don't act in alignment with our values. And so to look away for a lot of us is actually a betrayal of those values and a betrayal of who we are and really who we are as human beings with one another. And at the same time, we know that it's not sustainable to be completely plugged into the news to try to respond to every single uh, thing that pops up, the multiple things that pop up day to day. It's not healthy. And we certainly can't, jump into every new cause. So we really shouldn't try to approach it from that way either. And so, one of the things that I feel like I'm always coming back to, and it's not just in the last, year or several years, it's for me, this is like a question throughout my lifetime is like, how do I stay engaged as someone who cares, engage in the world with that care and respond to injustice? How do I do that without abandoning my own well-being in the process? How do I do that in a way that's sustainable? So today I want to share a few things with you. Well, it's more than a few, but there's some things that are helpful, but I also, of course, want to just say that none of these are practices that I have, all together, buttoned up that I have, I don't know what I want to say, that I have like fully covered. They are evolving. And I don't always, you know, do the things that I hope to do or that I know are helpful, but these are the practices that do help me, especially when I am doing them, right? So the first thing I just want to say is, around like the basic self-care kinds of practices. I don't want to talk about this for too long because you already know that it's important to get in movement or exercise, that we need good sleep. We need healthy food and balanced meals. We need time in nature. We need connection. There's, a solid few essentials that we could certainly speak about. What I will say is that when I am sacrificing any of those, everything else that I'm going to talk about gets harder. And so, some of the ways that I'll just speak to like a few things briefly. Some of the ways that I'm trying to tend to the things that are a little bit harder for me are one, I'm not a good breakfast eater. I oftentimes will, drink my coffee without eating, and then all of a sudden it's like 10 or 11 o'clock and I haven't had breakfast. So one of the things that helps me, and I'm sure this isn't groundbreaking advice, but is just to prep things on Sundays or at least the night before. Some of those ideas for me, like I've been making chia pudding, so I make them for the week, throw them in the fridge, and then I have something easy to eat in the morning. Or I will combine all the, excuse me, dry ingredients for like a smoothie and just like put those in little containers so that it's easier, a little bit more accessible for me to eat a healthy uh, breakfast, with nourishment and protein. Um, I also think we can recognize where we can combine activities so we can get, movement, food, rest, being outside as well. We can take a walk, we can lie down in the grass in a park, we can eat a nourishing meal outside. So as much as we can combine these things, that can be helpful. Of course, there's other ways to like stack habits that I'm not going to get into right now, but that we can consider. I have been building in some check-ins, setting timers, reminders to rest throughout the day. For me, a lot of times I am working from home, so I can go and lie down on the floor for 10 minutes in Shavasana, and that's a nice rest for me. In times when we're, in an office or not, the floor, lying down on the floor isn't accessible, just getting out and taking a walk around the block, or sometimes I'll like just do some quick movements and lifting weights. Those things are helpful as little movement breaks. And then I also really try to protect my wind down time, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a moment, but I keep a pretty steady sleep schedule. It's not exact, but I usually go to sleep within about the same half hour-ish time, maybe an hour. And I allow myself time to read before bed to really start calming my mind. So those are just some kind of basic things that I'll share. And then, one of the other things which is just around stewarding my attention. And um, so with that, like I've stopped plugging my phone in my room to charge, plugging it in to charge. It's charging in the living room at night, and I most of the time refrain from looking at my phone for at least the first hour of the morning. So if I want to read news, I am, read instead of reading the news, I'm sitting down and reading a book every morning, which is much more grounding for my nervous system. And it also means I'm getting through a lot more books, right? And, that also means that sometimes I end up missing the news altogether, which we really don't need to be plugged in every single day. Usually, if there's something really big, someone will tell us. And that's one of the other things I'm working on, recognizing that my partner is very plugged into the news. some common activist chat groups that I have decided to leave because it was too overwhelming to my nervous system. He's still in those. So I can outsource some of my information intake to him and just recognize that I don't need to know everything that's happening locally or worldwide. And if there's something big, I will hear about it. And then I can also, tune back in ways that are a little bit more manageable without getting sucked into my phone. Right. Another thing I will say is that when I do read or when I do pay attention to news or follow what's happening, I do not watch the news. I can't tell you how many times I hear people say, like, oh, I don't watch the news. And I'm like, good, don't watch the news. Read the news as much as you not, don't read as much as you can, right? But like, let that be the way that you take in information. Um, videos and news media. I don't care whether it's left, right, or somewhere in the middle, whatever it is. There's a lot more tugging at your emotions, right? And kind of reeling you in and finding those ways to get you to emotionally react. And so just recognizing that, you know, we're sensitive people, right? I have a very sensitive nervous system. And so all those like images, the music, the editing, all of these things kind of overwhelm my senses even more. And in general, just reading long form articles with more depth from a few trusted sources is a lot easier on the nervous system and a more reliable way to get information as well. Um, so that is, I think, mostly what I wanted to say around stewarding attention. Oh, I guess like the other thing I would just say is that when I do have that urge to scroll, sometimes I succumb to that urge to scroll just like the next person. But the other thing I've really been trying to recognize is just like remembering that there are these techno-fascist oligarchs out there that are profiting from our attention, from our data, from our outrage. And we really need to be aware of where we can prevent some of that colonization of our minds when possible. So that helps me to put my phone down as well. I also, just kind of still in this realm of capacity, I let my self-care be pretty flexible. I would say most self-care advice out there really is built around routine and consistency. And as someone with ADHD, there are some things that I've built into my world over the years that are consistent. But I would say that generally my brain doesn't love consistency or routine. And so I try to really work with where I'm at. And so that means, that sometimes my yoga practice is Shavasana, sometimes it's an active asana sequence, sometimes it's a short pranayama practice. And what matters more is like taking that time to be present and build that awareness time. And, sometimes I read in the mornings before I move my body, before I do a yoga practice. And I don't think that the sequence of these things matters so much. Maybe for some people it does. For me, it doesn't matter so much as long as I'm still tending to these different aspects of my self-care that are important, right? Um, and so, the other thing I'll just say is I'm also like lowering the bar for what deserves my stress. There are a lot of times in my work when I am trying to complete a task, whatever, finishing a project, getting something written that just doesn't happen. And all of a sudden, like a week has gone by, and the thing that I thought was going to happen on Monday didn't happen by Friday. And I used to really beat myself up about these things. I'm not saying that I don't still experience frustration because I do. And I'm not like going into that story and letting those emotions kind of overtake. I'm spending some time with those parts of me and just really recognizing that it's not the end of the world when certain things don't get done, that there are other priorities that are more important. And right, going back to values, right? um, so that those are some things that I feel like are important. Of course, there's many other things related to capacity, but those are the ones I wanted to share. And then we can consider just the perspective taking. And with that, just like I'm sure some of you, my mind can spiral into pretty dark trajectories sometimes about kind of what lies ahead. And I have to really practice interrupting that. Of course, we need to kind of, be aware and be realistic and be kind of planful, so to speak. And of course, that spiral isn't helpful to our mental health, physical health, activism, or anything, right? Because it kind of leads to shutdown oftentimes, at least for me. Um, so just recognizing, where we can respond right now, it helps me to just to look at it more from the lens of like, how do I want to show up in this context? How do I want to show up for others? How do I want to show up for myself, given this reality or inside this reality? And so, one of the teachings I come back to again and again from the Bhagavad Gita is recognizing that we are responsible for our actions, but not in control of the results of those actions. And that helps me to tune back into doing the next thing that's in front of me to do, recognizing what is mine to do, also discerning what is not mine to do. Um, and really just tuning into my agency in this present time rather than, going into the future and where things are going. What do we have control of or agency over in this moment? Right. And so then that means noticing what inputs and behaviors, thought patterns push me toward overwhelm and which ones bring me back into steadiness and, acting accordingly. I think it's also helpful to expand our lens, our view. We could certainly look at this in terms of, what people in other countries have experienced, are experiencing, how they've still continued to live life. We could look at examples through history, and we could also look to the natural world to which we belong as human beings. And I think for me right now, the human crises that we are facing take up so much space, not just in my brain, but just like in, the news media, in the infosphere. And so that means, some of my like like climate grief and anxiety has sometimes been pushed to the side. So it's important for me to take that time in the natural world to allow some space for that grief. And at the same time, I think we can also, while we're there, recognize just how the rest of life continues even when they are under threat because of things that humans have caused. And then, of course, natural reasons as well, right? And so there's a large herd of deer, which I don't know, every time I go to this local tiny little strip of forest preserve near where I live, I think last time my partner and I counted like almost 30 deer that were around us. And these very peaceful creatures, just being able to kind of sit at a distance and watch them and imagine the world through their lens really helps me to open up mine, to open up my lens, my perspective. And it also gives that sense of just belonging to something larger and older than the current moment that we're in. Right? It doesn't erase everything, it just gives it a little bit more breathing room. I am also practicing what is called active hope. So some of you may be familiar with Joanna Macy, who's a recently passed away last summer. Joanna Macy is an environmental activist, a Buddhist studies teacher, scholar, and she spoke about this concept of active hope as something we do rather than something that we have. And that we generate hope by participating in the future that we want to see. Even when we feel despair, even when we lack optimism, we participate in the future that we want to see, and even in the lived realities of the moment that we can create, even if it's not the broader future. So we become a person who is hopeful rather than waiting to feel hopeful before acting. I think this is really important. And, on this note of, becoming a person who is hopeful, I was reminded of this a bit in a recent talk by historian Rashid Khalidi. And he was speaking about the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And even in that, he said that as bleak as things look, and, we could say are, that there is room for hope because more people around the world than ever before are not just acknowledging the genocide and occupation and ethnic cleansing of Gaza and of the West Bank, but people are recognizing the history. People are learning about the history and opposing, and that leaves hope, even though it's horrible right now. And so it's not discounting that, but it offers some hope for a future free Palestine. And so we can be part of that, right? We can be part of sharing, raising awareness where we can, and helping people to understand the truth of what is happening now and what has been happening. So ultimately, I am, finding hope right now by helping to create it with people around me, especially in my local community. And I see people, and I guess I'm part of it, here that we're not just building and creating new systems of care for the future, we are creating systems of care for now, right? For this moment, and really living what it is that we want to see in the world. And so we can do that too. So just keeping that perspective. Okay, this is getting longer than I thought. I might have to share this in a few different clips. I didn't mean to turn it into like an hour-long podcast. But I've got a couple more for you. So this, with respect to action. One thing I think is really important to recognize is that, well, one, consuming information is not action. It's important to be informed, but we cannot mistake news consumption for taking action or being involved in some way, right? And we really have to balance consumption and action. So that means that, when I have a lower capacity week, and I just don't have as much energy to engage in certain things, then I actually really need to be mindful of tapering off and not taking in as much information, because that will overwhelm my nervous system. And then just being honest with myself when I have a little bit more capacity in what I can engage in. Not necessarily that we're not filling that with new things to do just so that we can be exhausted again. But just really checking in with our capacity is important. Because, again, it goes back to what I said in the beginning, that burnout comes also from taking in distressing information without anywhere for it to go. Right, without acting in alignment with our values. So I want to just say that this doesn't mean that I jump into, acting for every single thing that I read about. There are absolutely things that we can do one time, short term, things that I jump into for that, but I don't change, the things that I'm focused on, the causes that I'm focused on with, the news cycle. And so oftentimes, I'm involved with a lot of mutual aid support with a lot of immigrant issues and rapid response. And so for me, sometimes this means just going back to the things that I'm already involved in, maybe recommitting to a certain role, maybe exploring another angle of what I can do, maybe doing exactly what I have been doing and recognizing that that's enough. And then sometimes it's recognizing the intersectionality between issues. So, like one example I have for that is that in the recent midterm primaries, I didn't do this. This wasn't an act that I did, but a lot of my friends and neighbors who are doing rapid response to ICE, they organized to stand watch in vulnerable communities so that they could look out for ICE and ensure that the constituents of that area could exercise their rights to vote. And that so there you have this intersection then of like voters' rights and on the other side voter suppression with immigration and immigrant rights as well. So I think just seeing how these things go together and how we can show up again for that was like maybe a one-day thing for some people, and these are some of the things that we can do. Um, and then just recognizing also that no action is too small. I know this is like one of my biggest frustrations is when people say that there's nothing they can do. There's always something that we can do, right? We may not be able to change, we can't change everything that's happening right now, but we can certainly act where we can and influence what we can. And sometimes that is locally. So one person, bringing food to a community fridge means a family eats. 20 neighbors bringing food to that community fridge means that impact multiplies. But whether it's one or whether it's 20 people, that's still impacting someone in like right now, whether somebody eats or not, whether somebody has a house over their head or, whatever it might be, right? So just remembering those things. And, one thing I don't know if I've talked about, I've mentioned this a little bit of my email list, but on November 8th, 2025, um, in the town that I live in Oak Park, there were 13 workers, landscapers and construction workers that were abducted. Only a couple of those were targeted detentions. The rest of them were random. They just picked up whoever they could find on the street. And that happened very quickly, but hundreds of people, maybe thousands of people, honestly, took to their sidewalks, to their blocks out in front of their houses to whistle, to alert nearby workers, to do whatever they could do to protect their neighbors. And we've seen this, of course, throughout Minnesota, and so many different levels of care. And while we, you know, unfortunately um, couldn't protect those 13 people that didn't go home to their families that night. I know that we did prevent many other people from being abducted that day, and that there were parents that were able to return to their children and eat dinner with their families that night because people showed up. And that is an example of a larger community, but again, whether we're one person or 1,000, there is an impact that is real for people, even if it's not everyone. So very important. Every person who decides to act strengthens our movements and builds collective power. And when we don't act, all those opportunities kind of weaken. So another piece of this action thing is just working, acting closer to home. And one of those can be through mutual aid. And I think a lot of people are familiar with mutual aid by now, but mutual aid is the practice of community members supporting one another directly. It's not charity from the top down. It's reciprocal among neighbors without application processes, without means testing, and all these other barriers that people often encounter. Right? This is one of the oldest forms of human solidarity. We can look at many collectivist societies and groups that have practiced mutual aid, though maybe called something else, and it's having a necessary renaissance right now. So my partner and I have helped run a free store in Oak Park since the very beginning, since January 2024. And this was during a time when a lot of our neighbors were helping to resettle migrants that were in our town. And as those people were getting apartments, they needed things to fill those apartments, right? Or not to fill them, but they needed furniture and household items to be able to live. So at that time, a few of us had organized to open up this space in the basement of a church where neighbors could bring their household items and furniture that they wanted to donate, and then families could come and shop, but basically come and get the things that they need. And we've been lucky enough, it was supposed to be like a 3-month thing that we had that space, but we've now been open for more than 2 years and serve anybody in the community. And, it's an alternative economy, right? That meets real material needs and strengthens our communities while we're also keeping things out of landfills. So it's kind of like meeting a few of these different, at least values of mine that I feel are important. And I've also watched lots of people, hundreds of people come in saying that they had nothing. Maybe they just arrived to Chicago and leave with things to fill their home, and also maybe new connections and connections to other vital resources. So that lets me see the impact that this work is having day in and day out, right? Um, Excuse me. It's a smaller scale that I think can help nurture hope and really see where we can have an influence. And likewise, there's a newer like block organizing model called Beekeepers. And this is like a community organizing model to get to know our neighbors on our individual blocks, to get to know those neighbors, so that we can support one another now and maybe in times in the future if there's a crisis or when there's a crisis. So there's a number of different activities that people are encouraged to do, whether it's organizing mutual aid among their blocks, but also just really recognizing, who are the vulnerable neighbors that might need help in a crisis, who has resources to share that can be helpful to others, and really building that community preparedness and resilience. And, so that also is like connecting us directly with people that we know care. Maybe people, we don't necessarily have to even like agree with them on every single thing, but there's this sense of mutual support that's being created. So showing up for the macro issues. So I'm talking a little bit about the local stuff, but I don't want it to mean that we don't need to act at a larger level. Again, my activism right now is mostly moved toward the local level at this time, but it doesn't mean that there aren't still things that that I do and that we can do at a national level or even an international level. So one thing that I'll just name is that I've had to unsubscribe from a lot of newsletters. I guess maybe this could be up in the attention part, in order to better focus on a few and a few calls to action rather than like 10, 20, 30 different organizations, asking me to do a different thing, right? One of those I will plug, not just because she's my friend, but also because her work is really clear, manageable, and just very thorough and amazing, is my friend Omkari Williams, who I'll put a link. I don't know how I'm sharing this yet. I think in my YouTube video, but I'll make sure to link to Omkari's website. If you follow her newsletter, Omkari puts out a weekly email with just an action that can be done in 10 minutes or less. Sometimes it is something local, oftentimes it's something more at a national level and asking people to call their legislators or participate in a boycott movement or something else, right? But they're quite manageable, and Omkari also puts out some like good news emails as well, which I think we all need. And they're not like fluff; they're like good, like hopeful, hopeful good news. One other one I just want to speak to is that we can also send mutual aid or direct aid across borders. And we've seen this in a lot of different ways. Many of the my partners in Guatemala and Peru, we've done this for in various collaborated with my partners to help get direct aid to their communities for school or for internet. Um, and even in a place like Gaza right now, with the genocide that is continuing, even if it's not in the news as so much right now because Iran has taken over. Well, Iran hasn't taken over, but you know what I mean. That's where the coverage is. But Watermelon Sisters is an organization founded by a woman who lives not too far from me in the Chicago area, Palestinian woman. And she's a friend of a trusted friend. My trusted friend is very closely involved in the organization. I very much trust the work that they're doing. But Watermelon Sisters sends 100% of their donations to Gaza for food, essential supplies, also to provide art therapy to the children there. And so that literally is helping people to stay alive and helping to provide care. No matter how far away it may be, we can still provide direct aid. So there's still always something that we can do, even in something that looks as bleak as Gaza. Um, I also think it's important to know our lanes. For me, I said this before, not every cause is mine to join or lead. And saying no to some things has allowed me to say yes to others. Um, like so even last fall, during the height of ICE and CBP activity in the Chicago area, I was asked to admin a rapid response chat, and I had to decline. And I felt guilty about saying no at the time because I recognized that everybody that was doing this work was feeling exhausted and overwhelmed by the volume of texts coming in and the activity. And I also recognized the impact that walking away from my phone for 4 hours and having 600 messages when I got back. I recognized the impact that that was having on my nervous system. And while it's hard for all the people. It was also clear to me that some people were able to do that kind of work, that kind of role, uh, in a way that wasn't as overwhelming to them. Even, my partner, he's not an admin necessarily, but like these things don't take the same toll. He cares, and they do take a toll, but not like the same kind of toll on his nervous system. Just especially when we're talking about like volume and quantity. So just, being able to say no with that, but then recognizing like, oh, you know what I can do is I can organize the rapid response teams to stand ice watch at the free store and do this on like a very hyper local scale. That I can take the lead on organizing, right? I can help with, just responding to the alerts. I can help create protocols, and I can, help to just keep our shoppers as safe as possible, without necessarily needing to assume that role that felt a lot more overwhelming. Right? So just recognize that we all bring diverse personalities, skills, and circumstances to this work. And then a part of that is just also seeing like that a lot of the things that some of us will do will be invisible. It will be unseen. by most people, right? It's going to be that behind the scenes kind of work, and that's really important work. All right, so my marathon video, but we're almost done. And I hope that just me sharing some of this has been helpful to you. I feel like I'm being a little rambly. Connection, community connection is imperative, right? We absolutely need to have the support and share mutual support with people in this work, people that feel it as deeply, and people that are committed to acting. So with that, leaning into mutual aid as relationship, I spoke about kind of the more action side of mutual aid when I talked about um, acting locally or close to home. But just the free store is not just about things. It's also created a dignifying space, I think. That's what people say, where everyone is welcome. We're not just connecting people to resources, but oftentimes providing ongoing support. There are families I'm in touch with on a regular basis and can help to, get like resource the things that they may need in a given moment, not just physical items, but maybe help with something else. We're able to respond to evolving needs. And some of the people that came or like arrived at first as shoppers have become part of the volunteer team. We've become friends. There's just a lot of real trust, and I don't know. These are like these people are my heroes in many ways. They're just people I really cherish, and yeah. So that relationship really goes hand in hand with how we share mutual aid. And the beekeeper model and many other things also support this kind of mutual aid as relationship. Um, I don't know what I want to call it, but just that view, that practice. And then I think it's important that we have relationships with people who can really hold a variety of experiences, emotions, things that are happening. I'm connected to quite a few groups where I really love the people, but our work is like focused on the work, on organizing. We don't necessarily have as much connection in, other forms outside of that. But last fall, I helped organize a fundraiser, and somehow that fundraiser with these four other women has led to like actual friendships where now we go to like storytelling events and painting classes. We just spent like a little informal mini activist retreat together. And we also still do the things that are like there's space for the heavy stuff. Right? We go to films, we go to lectures. A couple months ago, we saw The Voice of Hind Rajab, which I recommend everyone see and do so with other people so that you're not alone in that witnessing and that you have people to process with afterwards. For us, one of the actors, it was the opening night, so one of the actors came out and did like a Q&A, which gave that time to process in that debriefing. And those conversations continued as we were leaving. But this is very different. And you just think about what it means to bear witness. Bearing witness over the length of a film with other people, with time to talk about it afterwards, so you don't just go back into whatever the next thing in your day is, or try to go to sleep, God forbid. This is very different than sitting alone within four walls of your home scrolling social media alone, right? It has a very different impact on our nervous systems, how we can hold these things and how we can respond, right? So what can sometimes get stuck turns more into solidarity and hopefully sets that foundation for the next step of action in some form. And then trusting the collective rhythm is my last point. Just recognizing that there are other people involved in this work. So it helps to actually then be connected to other people involved in the work that you're doing. Because when I need to take a step back, and sometimes this is for a week or for 2 weeks where like I really need to contract a little bit and focus on some other things, and I can't do the same. I can't be in the same roles as usual. But I can trust, I know that if I step back, it's not, this isn't, I'm not single-handedly the one making a bunch of stuff happen. There are hundreds of people, right? There are all these networks that are acting together. And so I can trust that those will continue, that they're strong, and that I can step back in when I have the capacity, and that some other person or people are able to take breaks and rest, and that we really share in that load. Um, and so I guess, I just want to close today with just recognizing that none of this is linear. I've talked about a lot of things, probably sound like I've got a lot of, I'm very active and have a lot of things figured out, but there are days I certainly fall to pieces. Some days I feel more balanced, and it certainly is a process and a practice. But I think it's important just to recognize that social change has always been driven by ordinary people, both people living through unthinkable conditions as well as allies. And that, together, it's really that, like, individually, those acts of care and courage can feel really small, but like as a whole, it is what contributes to change. It contributes to change in the moment and impact in the moment for people, and it hopefully also sets the stage for future generations and what we're leaving behind. So with that, thank you for sticking around with me, and just know that you're not alone. Know that there is support, and there are way more people that care than those that are causing harm. And with that, I'd love to hear from you if you want to drop a note in the comments about any practice or perspective that is helping you through these times. I really would love to hear from you. Thanks so much for listening.